Hello and welcome to the B&B show. My name is Brandon Kane, and this guy here to my left, that's going to be Seahawks Brendan Nelson in the house here with our weekly now, not twice a week, get down to weekly here in the off season B&B show. And we've got one that's a kind of a special one, not on our normal list of the shows we've got scheduled for this off season, but a fun one nonetheless. Brendan, I appreciate you coming on in here tonight. How you doing this evening?
I am doing pretty good tonight, man. It's been a very interesting week or so here, and I'm here for it. At the end of the day, this is what we wanted, and this is what we got, and now we've just got to do the right thing for this part of it.
It does seem like we're really early on in this coaching search, but you feeling the general direction this thing is taking in their process and what they're undertaking to looking for this next head coach, just kind of generally.
Yeah, I think we're getting some indication. Schneider gave a press conference a handful of days ago where he kind of went over some stuff and didn't give too much away, but I feel like he gave a little bit away. I feel like he did say some stuff that was educational, did say some stuff that was interesting. And I feel like I learned something from that conference in terms of what he might be looking for. We're starting to see what these other teams are going to do. And that's obviously very relevant because there are going to be certain guys taken off the board by these other teams and what they're doing. So we're seeing what's starting to develop there. We've gotten some, I would say, surprising non-firings, which means that there's going to be less hirings. It's starting to shape up.
That works in our favor, wouldn't you say? Like a not a McCarthy going on the market. On top of the fact Schneider referenced him as being a coach he liked, maybe becoming a Hawks coach if he was. But that's helps us in the search with one less team trying to pull from the talent pool.
Right. And Philly not firing Sirianni because they would have gone all out to get the best guy possible because that's what they do in Philadelphia.
Yes,
And I think that's a desirable spot, even though there's a ton of pressure on you to succeed immediately. It's still a very desirable place to go, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think that the Falcons getting Belichick, which looks like that's what's going to happen, is great because that's not a guy who I had on my list at all. And he gets to go to a team that I think is the most appealing for a new head coach because of their roster and because of their owner, because of their flexibility. I think that's great. I think that Pittsburgh keeping Tomlin is preferable. I prefer that to any other thing that could happen vis-a-vis Pittsburgh and Tomlin. So
Pierce,
yeah,
Pierce looks like he's going to the Raiders here, right?
they're
I've gotten
poking
back and forth.
around. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
poking around, but I'd be a little surprised if they moved off of Pierce. I mean, look, they need to save money. Antonio Pierce is a great way to save money. That's a guy who probably thought he was never going to be a head coach in his life. He was just a positional coach, was probably good with that. And yeah, now he's got this opportunity. He'll probably work for a couple $1,000,000. Make it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. And they're paying two coaches right now off the books that are not on their coaching their team anymore. So definitely,
Right.
like you say, it could be on top of they've been known for being a bit of a cheaper organization.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons they moved to the Raiders in the first place. So the pool team lessons down, Brendan, which helps us out. We also then start to get a little bit more of some announcements here on the interviews that the Seahawks are going to conduct. What I do like about this process, Brendan, is the NFL's kind of forced these teams to be exhaustive in their process now. Schneider was talking about the rules and the boxes you have to check as far as all the things that you have to do to make sure that you're fitting to the rules and regulations for these hirings now. And that does mean that I think it forced him to be a little bit less of, oh, we just want this guy. And now they've really got to turn him over and look him at. And it'll slow everything down, it seems a bit. We've gotten more candidates. Hawks are beating the road, aren't they? I mean, they're calling all the lines, huh? Everybody's getting a call.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't do it that way, you shouldn't do it, right? Unless you've already got somebody in house that you're going to roll with and you feel really good about, then I think you're obligated to search under every single possible rock. And it seems like that is what we're doing. I like it. I don't love everybody that we're looking at, but I'm also at the same time, there aren't a lot of candidates we've looked at that I just hate.
No.
I can see the benefit of most things. There
Yeah.
are some things that would be a bridge too far, like Arthur Smith as head coach. But that's not going to happen. Of course that's not going to happen. So, it's ultimately kind of my job here to really try to parse through the narrative when I'm looking at these coaches and try to figure out what the actual positives and negatives could be.
The Graham one would be tough though. Like that would be You go from Coach Carroll to Graham, like that would sting just a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about him a little bit tomorrow. I actually, he's actually one of the next guys on my list here. But yeah, that would be a hard sell.
Can you imagine going Carroll to Graham? I was like, he doesn't like the blitz. He hasn't had the best of defenses recently, but okay. He did okay work this past year, I guess. So
yeah, pretty decent.
Pretty
I mean,
decent.
at the end of the day, here's my thing. Like, if you hire the next guy and he doesn't work out, he'll be out of here in 2 years. He's easy to move off of. That was the thing with Carroll, right? Carroll was hard to move off of because he had a floor. He had a high floor, relatively speaking, and he was entrenched in the franchise organization because of what he had done in the past. At the very least, even if the next guy we hire is Arthur Smith or Lincoln Riley, you're going to get them out of there no problem in a couple years if things don't go well, because they have no roots. They have no history of success that keeps them in town.
It's true. It's very true. And that's why it's just about committing to getting the right guy. It isn't about having to hold on to old, but commit to the right process. You don't have to magically find the right one every time, but you're seeking to do that if you can find it, but just committing to the process there of then. So you like the list so far. You feel pretty good about that. The Schneider press conference, just wanted to ask you about this one as well. I got a general indication from him. Obviously, he was doing his job of kind of tiptoeing around like through a landmine field as far as giving out any real nuggets. But I did get a little bit from him, Brendan, that he was leaning a little bit to the offensive side of the ball and some of what I was taking away. Did you get that same kind of feel in general terms?
Yeah. And I think the things that he said are very obviously true. This idea of like, if you hire a defensive head coach, then your quarterback gets the rug pulled out from under him constantly because he keeps losing his coordinators. Whereas if you give him stability in terms of an offensive head coach, you're going to be good. He brought up the Alex Smith situation, which might be the all-time example of jerking a quarterback around.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? I'm sure he knows, even though I do think he likes Geno Smith and is good with Geno Smith for now. We're not that far away from drafting a new quarterback, be it this offseason or next offseason or 2 off seasons from now. Then the QB of the future is coming soon, and he's probably thinking like, how can I give that quarterback the best possible chance to succeed? It's by having an offensive coach that can grow old with that quarterback.
Yeah. Well, you notice he didn't say something like, well, we've got to get the, defensive coordinator here. So we got to worry about the development of this defensive player here, right? The middle linebacker or Witherspoon, so we can make sure that we're, he went to the offensive side of the ball and chose the Alex Smith example, Brendan, which is part of where I pull that from a little bit of the lean to the offensive side of the ball and what he's showing you. And the Packers background there with him in Green Bay. I mean, all those years, Green Bay's been looking at head coaches through the years, from Holmgren to Sherman to Ray Rhodes to Mike McCarthy to LaFleur. Those guys are all tending to be offensive side of the ball, with the exception of Rhodes for, I think, 2-year period. And they didn't last long with Rhodes as a defensive coordinator there. So they do go that way. That is his tendency. That's his background. He was meeting with Ron Wolf, his mentor. Certainly, I'm sure Ron was probably instructing him a little bit in that same direction of things, which it's just cool to hear guys like Holmgren and Ron Wolf in his ear. Brendan, isn't it nice to know that your general manager is having those kind of very smart minds that are informing him and letting him know a little bit of, just helping to guide the process. It can't hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was referencing it was a little bit in my, I was doing a member stream today, Brendan. I was referencing a little bit like, I don't know if you ever saw this. There's this call that you can find on YouTube of a call that John Kennedy's placing back in the day as he's being recorded to Dwight Eisenhower during the missile crisis. And he's just kind of debriefing and updating Eisenhower on the phone call. And it's just kind of a cool little moment, as, he doesn't have to do that. Eisenhower's not a president anymore. It's just kind of a sign of respect thing. But then Eisenhower's also doing a great job on his side, not telling Kennedy what to do, but just trying to be the supportive guy that you'd hope the guy could be in that moment, and guiding and helping him down the right path, which was no doubt a real stressful time at that moment. So you got to think, and I just kind of picture John and them the same way in the war room, with Wolf and Holmgren in there, maybe at the same time. Yeah, that would have been really cool. But let's get to the real good nugget here, Brendan, on this. I've had time now to look at this coaching search. You've had time to look at this coaching search since we've last talked. We're going to discuss some guys that are maybe some lesser known name guys that people aren't maybe discussing about as much, that maybe you like or I like a little bit more. But let's give the people, as we've had a chance to do our research on this, the kind of a bottom line top 5 list of where we stand right now with the coaching search. Is who are the guys that we really would like to see them hire from the background stuff that we've looked into here. And kind of we'll go from 5 down to 1. So we won't lead with the top, Brendan. We'll tease the top at the front of the stack on this one, though I'm sure both of our subs know which way we probably lean on this, as we get asked these questions quite a bit, at least on the top side of it. But let's start with number 5 for you. And give me yours, and then I'll go back and we'll just kind of react to each other's on this, on why and where you came to what you came to on him.
Well, one thing that I want to stress here is it is really hard for people like you and me and pretty much anybody who is a fan of a team on the outside looking in to know who's going to actually be a good head coach, because there's the aspect of producing good football, and then there's also the perspective of, are you a leader of men? And it's that latter part that you can't really know until they get in there and actually take over. Like, before 2020, I don't think any fan would have been able to predict educatedly that Kevin Stefanski was going to be one of the best coaches in the league and Joe Judge was going to be completely inept. I don't think you could have done that. I think that you would have made a guess, maybe an educated guess, but I think you would have been, how would you be able to know that Joe Judge would have picked up nothing from Bill Belichick, and Stefanski would, if anything, look like he's going to be better than the guys that he learned from? So it's really hard to do this. And I'll say this, there are a few guys that I feel like are a little interchangeable when we have this conversation, because they've done impressive things at their various stops in their career. And we just can't know if they're going to be leaders of men, if they're going to be able to actually take on that head coaching responsibility. There's no way we're going to be able to know that. My number 5, with all that being said, would be, I am going with Dave Canales, currently of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, still alive in the postseason, by the way. Still alive in the postseason. Got that postseason victory under his belt. 43 years old. He's only got 1 year of coordinator experience, which does throw me off a little bit here. But the thing with Canales is, you look at his resume, it's pretty much all in Seattle. So you look at what he was doing here, you almost wonder if he was on the head coaching track, and then he kind of realized he could fast track it if he left the city to go to Tampa Bay to be an offensive coordinator.
Okay.
And maybe that kind of threw off his plan. Maybe he was the guy who was planning to eventually take over as the head coach. Now, I think that his resume in Seattle speaks for itself. It's very impressive. He got Geno Smith on the right track in 2022, which was very impressive. He had some success as the passing game coordinator in 2020 and 2021. He helped fix Russell Wilson, who after 2017, he was broken, I feel like. After 2017, his fundamentals were in the dirt, and Canales became his quarterback coach, and he did great work getting Wilson back up to that elite level. And before then, I think he did phenomenal work as a wide receiver coach in Seattle. So my number 5 would be Dave Canales. Definitely somebody that I've really been turned on to recently after not being so sure, because that 1 year of coordinator experience thing is tough. So I like him well enough.
Definitely, certainly a guy too. Corbin's been banging the drum for him big time. I've got a lot of hesitancy myself with Canales. I think some of it does come back to backtracking to his time with Russ. And when I did a lot of looking at Russ through the years in his time here, I don't know if I always saw as much a big development part of his game. He got a little bit better at the line of scrimmage than when he was younger. You know, he got a little bit better at progression reading, but he's kind of was always the same through all the years. I mean, he just sort of was the same guy he'd always been. And while I'll give you, he definitely did great work with Geno, and he's done phenomenal work with Baker Mayfield, getting his best year. And hell, I mean, that team's, with that defense, anything's possible, right? They can shut down anybody, and the offense certainly can do enough on their side. They've been really good too as well. I mean, he's done great work there this year, running a pretty balanced offense overall. But I do look at Brennan on him as a guy that he's only got the 1 year coordinating experience. I'm not sure about the time with Russ necessarily in Seattle, and then the other candidates that just have a little bit more richer kind of experience behind him a bit. But his star seems to be on the rise. And I'll tell you this, he's in that place that I think Bobby Slowick's here too, Brendan, where I think they're in that Ben Johnson place from last year, where you give him 1 more year, and then we're talking about him being a no-doubter head coaching possibility next season. And if that's the case, why not get out ahead of it a year like you're advocating for? We're Well, my number 5 on my list on this one, Brendan, is going to actually be Brian Callahan, who is going to be the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. He has overtaken for me Dan Quinn, who's fallen down to my 6th role. He's dropping right now like a bit of a brick for me in my mind. But Brian Callahan, I went back and just kind of looked again back at what he's done in Cincinnati in 3 years. And I think, in my opinion, it's very hard to create a great offense, Brendan, when you do not have good pass protection and you do not have a good run blocking line. It is very hard to do that. I mean, I'm talking a top end offense. And when Burrow walked in there, along with Brian Callahan walking in there, that's not what they had to work with. And he was able to maximize Burrow's abilities and his anticipatory throws and get him as a high volume passer rather than trying to bang their running game into a wall, which they never seem to have any kind of consistent running game because they just don't have the blockers. If you watch the games, creating the space in the holes. I mean, they now have gotten it up to being better at pass protecting. That was something that's kind of guided along with Burrow through the years. But every year he's got productivity out of that offense and top end productivity out of that offense. His father was a former head coach in this league and a head coach down at the college level, former offensive line coach. So he's got a little bit of a history as far as the head coach, not coming into this completely flying blind like some coaches might be in these circumstances. And then just as the cherry on top to me, what he did with Jake Browning this past year. I don't think Jake Browning is all that in a bag of chips. I think what this guy is able to do and what he's showing back there as a coordinator and the ability to help his quarterbacks out, making the game easier for them and how they scheme stuff up, and especially scheming up some of the easier throws, sometimes on the back of that anticipation, and reading those option routes. He's really good at that. And I think he would be a bright mind to bring in here and another guy that's on the rise.
Yeah. Callahan is very interesting. He's got 5 years coordinator experience, which people are definitely going to be into over somebody who has like 1, right? He's actually got an extensive background doing this stuff. And he had bad years, but he didn't really have much to work with those couple years that he was bad. He kind of kept the boat afloat with Browning this year, which very impressive. Browning barely cut it in college, honestly, if we're being honest, right? By the end there, he was just barely starter caliber. He does not have an NFL arm at all. And he was able to keep it going there. I'm on board with pretty much anybody who's got a background with Peyton Manning, see if he learned anything from that period of time when he was in Denver, where he got his start with the Peyton Manning Broncos, helped win the Super Bowl there. QB coach in a couple different places, nothing extraordinary, right? Like when he was the QB coach for Matt Stafford, Stafford had typical Stafford seasons. In Oakland, when he was with Derek Carr had typical Derek Carr seasons, right? Just, not good, not bad, just normal, pretty much.
Right.
And yeah, once the Bengals got that crew going, it was it's been good, man. They almost won the Super Bowl a couple years ago. They probably should have, honestly.
Yeah. And to your point, once you went from having who's the Washington bust receiver that ran 4.2? What was his name?
John Ross.
So you went from having, a John Ross as your number 1 receiver, kind of when he first walks in there as coordinator, to then you get Jamar Chase, then you get T. Higgins, then you get Burrow in there a little bit. And once you give him something good, this is part of why I like him, is once he's gotten the great talent, he's found a way to maximize that great talent, get the most out of it. And especially being a guy offensive minded, leaning that side of the ball. I like what I see out of Callahan, man. I think he'd be a pretty good candidate. Give me your number 4 on your list here.
Okay, number 4. I am going to go with, this is one of the guys we've actually requested an interview with.
Ooh.
Was not somebody that we talked about that much last week. It's Frank Smith. Frank Smith of the Miami Dolphins, voted the number 1 coordinator in all of the NFL this most recent season for his work under Mike McDaniel in Miami. So 2 years offensive coordinator. Obviously, this year the Dolphins offense was pretty remarkable, pretty up there. Almost 30 points a game, 0.095 EPA per play, 4th. The year before that, they were good, 11th in points per game. And remember, Tua missed some games. And honestly, at this point, how good do we even feel like Tua is? I don't think very many people think Tua is even good. And they've got that elite offense. So Frank Smith, 2 really nice years over in Miami. Before then, he was a tight end coach in Oakland during some years where they ran everything through their tight ends as a passing attack. Darren Waller, Jared Cook, Foster Moreau, It was a very tight end heavy offense, and he was the tight end coach during that time. He was the tight end coach for the Bears. He was trying to develop Zach Miller, the other Zach Miller, and then Zach Miller got hurt. Both Zach Millers got hurt a lot, I guess.
Don't be a tight end named Zach Miller in the NFL. You're going to have a short career.
Assistant offensive line coach under Sean Payton in New Orleans. Some really good offensive linemen during that period. Teron Armstead, Ben Grubbs, Jonathan Goodwin, Jari Evans, Zach Streep, Jermon Bushrod, Carl Nix, John Stitchcomb. Most of those guys made at least one Pro Bowl in their career. And yeah, it's a pretty nice resume. The question is, how do you separate it from what Mike McDaniel was doing? How do you separate the Frank Smith from the Mike McDaniel? That's hard, but that's often going to be the risk you take when you're trying to hire a coach. How do you separate what they did from what the guy above them was doing?
Yeah. I think it gets particularly hard too with McDaniels because he actually calls the plays there as the offensive coordinator. So that's where it gets a little bit tough too, where it's like, well, and then there's that. But then that also doesn't necessarily be a negative thing, Brendan, because then it can be, well, then he'll be more willing to just take on the head coaching role and hire a coordinator to call the plays, where some of these whiz-kiz offensive minds want to be the head coach and then they want to call the plays in addition, which I'm always saying, have a guy doing that. You just be the head coach, have that be your position, what you do. And when you look at the Dolphins specifically, Brendan, it was the stat that really jumped to my mind when you look at the early 2000s and the use of pre-snap, post-snap motion in the NFL, and you look 10 years forward into how much it's utilized now. And this is a team in the Dolphins that's at the forefront of utilizing that, of confusing defenses both right before the snap and right after the snap by some of that post movement. And it is a part of where I think offenses are going. That's part of the trend setting and offensively speaking, and to lean into that. And that is a place that when you look at our offense in recent years, there's too many snaps where everybody's just standing still at the snap on the outside. Nobody is in movement or motion. You're not challenging the linebacker's eyes on a fly sweep back across the formation. You're making it easier for them. And this offense with the Dolphins, man, and there's eye candy going every different direction, Brendan. It's here, it's over here. This guy's going this way, fake flip this way, fake flip that. And the point that you make about Tua is one that should not be understated, in that, Tua is what he is, right? Can we just say that? Can we say that without having to be shamed for it? Because there's just like, give him his props. No, he is what he is. He has a hard time throwing 30 yards down the football field in a stiff wind. That's Tua. And he's working around that and creating a prolific offense. So able to work around the talents he has with a diverse background, like you talked about, in a variety of different places.
Yeah, and that Miami offensive line's not good either, really.
The what?
The Miami offensive line's not good either, really.
No, they've been trying to cobble that thing together for a while. And even Teron Armstead, dude's good. What is he good for? 10 games a year? And then usually if he's not injured and fighting through, you're filling him in with somebody that's going back to his Saints days. So yeah, I think he's what they've gotten done there. And using Waddle and leaning into the strengths of those guys, right? You're not having Waddle and Reek just running traditional routes up the field and then asking Tua to hit 15-yard post routes on a line down the field as the safety's closing. You're like, no, let's have Tua just get the ball out of his hands, take advantage of his quick accuracy, and get it into our playmakers' hands and let him work with the ball, leaning into the talents. And that's a guy, like you said, with an offensive line background, with a tight end background, willing to do that. Really impressive too. Underrated as well, what they do in the run game. Raheem Mostert, a chain. The fact that they turned a chain into he looked like Chris Johnson this year when he was going.
Yeah.
Very impressive season. Well, my fourth guy is going to be, let me consult my list here, make sure I'm on this. Yeah. Is going to be Mike McDonald is my number 4. This is going to be the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, a very hot commodity out there right now here in this league. A guy's being spoken about a lot. I think we have requested an interview with him, right?
Yeah, we're trying to. I don't think it's been official, but we do plan on it. It seems like
he's Mike McDonald is a guy that runs the most, maybe the most complicated or one of the most complicated defenses in all the NFL. He learned at the feet of Wink Martindale, and where Wink Martindale just gets kind of like ready, fire, aim with his blitz approach. Mike McDaniel is much more sniper-like in how he's choosing to do it. He's much more understanding, I think, than Wink is at times, of bringing those stack fronts, running into the 4-man fronts that you end up in, right? That it's only 4 guys rushing the passer. But you end up dropping those guys into coverage with purpose to a spot, but that you're always creating that confusion first and foremost at the line of scrimmage and making those quarterbacks have to try to make a call. First get your line calls right. Who's coming, who isn't, Brendan? Just decide this guy's here, that guy, no him, yes him, that's the mic, then up over here, then over there. And then when you're wrong post snap, what does that mean for that offensive line when they guess wrong, when that quarterback guess wrong in his protections? And it happens a lot. It happened to us all over that game that we played against the Ravens. Did it not, Brendan? I mean, it was everywhere.
Yeah, a lot of that going on here. And you watch some, Ravens defensive tape right now. It's pretty wild, the stuff they're doing, the stuff they're cooking up.
Yeah.
Like there's some stuff going on there that clearly would translate to anywhere, because honestly, the Ravens defensive players don't seem like they're that good compared to, he doesn't have a Myles Garrett. He doesn't have a TJ Watt. He has Jadeveon Clowney and Justin Madiabuke or something like that.
That's right.
He's got Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton's wonderful. He's got they have Roquan, right?
They do.
Yeah, they have Roquan Smith. And it's not a bad collection of talent, but he is working with some guys that you should be able to find pretty much anywhere you go. You can find Clowney's. Clearly, Clowney was out there with like a month before the season started?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was widely available. You get him wherever you wanted on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Mike McDonald, 2 incredible years in Baltimore. By the way, he took over in a Ravens defense that was bad in 2021. It was actually below average to bad. And the 1 year he wasn't in Baltimore, he was the defensive coordinator at Michigan under Harbaugh and had great results there. Now, it's Michigan. They're good on defense pretty much every year. But still, he does his thing. He did his thing as a linebacker coach in Baltimore. He did his thing as a defensive back coach in Baltimore, helped to develop Patrick Queen, worked on guys like Pernell McPhee, Matt Judon, who would go on to be a very prolific player for the Patriots, CJ Mosley, Zadarius Smith, some of the defensive backs he coached, like Tony Jefferson, remember him, the safety? Ladarius Webb, Marlon Humphrey developed under him. He's been part of that Ravens tree for a long time, and pretty much everything he's touched. Yeah, Jimmy Smith, another one. Everything he's touched has been good, pretty much.
Yeah, the secondary is another good point with him. Did I cut you off there? Sorry.
No. Are we having issues right now? I can switch over to my other browser if you need to.
You're okay right now. I just want to make sure. That's the thing I like about him too, is it's not just the front style, it's the secondary knowledge that he brings into play too. And that he is going to flip things up from pre to post snap for what you see from a quarterback position. So he confuses you on the two levels, Brendan. He gets you first at the front, and then he gets you back in the secondary. And between the two of those, he can create utter and complete confusion. Just, you do not know who's coming, which, where, from what. And to your point on that, maximizing the talent, he's showing ability to that. Michigan, the thing that impressed me about that is you're right about them having a great defense every year, but he went down there to train that staff in this defense. He went down there to not just be the defensive coordinator, but both train the players and train the coaches how to run this scheme. And then when he left, that's what that team leaned on this year, was that defense. That's why they won the national title. They were able to shut down Michael Penix. I mean, that's really, to me, a very impressive thing beyond just what he's done. It'd be enough what he's done with the Ravens alone, right? What he's done this year with the Ravens and what the track record with the Ravens, that kind of be enough on its own. To do that with Michigan at a different level and to be able to show how well you can teach your message and get it across on top of just how good you are as a defensive coordinator. I like, and I'm intrigued by McDonald, and I think that he'll be able to build a pretty good staff too, Brendan, because he's got now a couple connections from a couple different places there to eventually potentially put that staff together.
Right.
Let's go to the number 3 for you on your list.
My number 3 was McDonald, so I don't have too much to add to everything you just said. But my number 3 is Mike McDonald as well. The resume's the resume's impeccable. It's hard to subtract anything away from what he's done in Baltimore. The 1 year he was out of Baltimore, he did great at Michigan. And again, it's not like these are some of the most talented players ever. Like when he was a linebacker coach in Baltimore, he had some good players, but some of the guys he got good stuff out of were like L.J. Ford, Kenny Young, Patrick Onwuasor, the final 45-year-old Terrell Suggs, or however old he was that last year.
He's pretty old.
Yeah, so some of the guys he got great results out of were not even super blue chippers.
Yeah. You want a modernized defense, Brendan. You want what's on the cutting edge defensively right now. This is the guy running it. It's not, it's the old cover 2 with a bear over front. It ain't the 4-3 under, but with Vic Fangio cover 2 principles. This is its own kind of thing. And he, much like a guy we'll talk about here soon, I know is going to be on both our list, and Ben Johnson, is guys that they are guys that understand how to do different things. They're not just sort of the one trick pony thing and how this is how I got to go about doing it. They're open to a lot of different ways to get the job done, and really love how he appears to be as one of the best teachers I think that we're going to have on this list, Brendan, that we're going to present. He certainly, I think, has that track record. For me, my number 3, I think, is going to maybe catch you as a bit of a surprise. I'm interested to see where you stand on this guy too. He's actually just the last probably 4 or 5 days, I'm really starting to kind of warm up to him. And you got to give me a chance to explain, okay? Give me a chance to explain, Brendan. Before you give me the eye look, before you give me the roll in the eyes, okay? Let me just explain. My number 3 is going to be Mike Vrabel. And my feeling on this is this. Brendan, is Arthur Smith going to get a job this offseason? Head coaching wise?
Of course not. No.
Do you think that there's going to be a better, would you say it's fair to say Arthur Smith at best case probably going to be offered an offensive coordinator job, maybe 3 different places?
Certainly should be. Like, if you guys think that Arthur Smith is a bad offensive coordinator, you really need to go look at the talent he was working with in Tennessee. It was not that great. He had Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, and he made them an elite offense. Like, if somebody doesn't hire him as an offensive coordinator this offseason, something's wrong.
So then would you say, I agree with everything you just said, would you say then it's a fair assessment to say that of the small, maybe let's say it's 4 offensive jobs that are offered to him as an offensive coordinator this offseason, that the best job that'll be offered to him with the most available talent is probably Seattle? And then when you...
Probably, yeah. Who else would it be? Like, the Bengals job might not be coming open. Like, the Bengals is the only other offense you could even consider, right?
But do the Bengals want to go to a run-based heavy offense from the pass-heavy offense that they're operating in right now?
No, definitely not. But I'm just saying in terms of raw talent.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing that I think would push it over the top, though, I think you would totally agree with me on, is I have in Mike Vrabel the guy that helped me get my job with Atlanta. This guy got me a head coaching job because of the success I had in tandem with him. He goes to Seattle, and I'm looking at those other available offensive coordinator jobs. It almost becomes a no-brainer that Arthur Smith comes to Seattle then with Vrabel, does it not?
If that is the package deal, then sign me up for that. I'm pretty excited about that. Like, and here's the thing. Arthur Smith was such a disaster in Atlanta, they will never let him be a head coach again.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got him as long as you want him. It's like back in the day under Andy Reid, Philadelphia had, I believe it was an offensive coordinator named Marty Mortenweg, who was really good. They really liked him. But he had already gotten his chance as a head coach, and he was so bad, they knew he's never going anywhere. We never have to worry about losing this guy because he's already had his shot, and it was a disaster. That's kind of how it could be with Arthur Smith. It's not one of these guys, oh, we'll have him for 2 years, and then he's going to peace out to a head coaching job.
Yeah. Oh, you blanked on it. Yeah, I agree the same way. And I think that he didn't necessarily get the fairest of shake there in Atlanta, Brendan, because I think if you have an offensive-minded head coach that you don't get the quarterback for, I'm not talking about getting him Mahomes or Burrow, okay? But getting them like a top-end QB. And I don't think that even the biggest naysayer of Arthur Smith would say that he was given anything close to a top quarterback option during his time there as a head coach.
Yeah. I think that there were some other things that he did that didn't really make sense. But he never got the quarterback. He got everything else, kind of. I like everything else on that offense, really. But I mean, the quarterback's kind of the most important thing.
It is. If you're not, especially you got an offensive head coach, I'd argue. Maybe if you're the defensive coach, you can get by with something less, but you better get the offensive guy, the guy. And Desmond Ridder is not going to get the job done for any offensive-minded head coach.
Can you give me 1 minute to switch browsers real quick?
Yeah, go for it. Let me get, I know we got a couple donations here. Let me, Don Mata, thank you for becoming a new member of the channel. I think that's for Brennan's side of it. So thank you for becoming a member of the channel over on Brendan's side. Very kind of you for that. Don Mata joining your crew, I think there, Brendan.
Oh, thank you, Don Mata. Welcome aboard.
Taker610, thank you for the $2 donation. Says, didn't Carroll's son join the UW staff? Offensive coordinator.
Yeah, he did.
Be interesting to see what kind of offensive coordinator coach Carroll's son will be as, knowing Carroll's kind of background with the offense and his view of the offense of it. But imagine you're going to get a lot more of Coach Carroll also in the building down there in the UW facilities, because I don't think Carroll's going to go get a job this offseason. You buying that?
doesn't seem like it's there. Like
Hmm.
somehow, some way, it seems like the Chargers might get Harbaugh, which blows my mind. If I'm Harbaugh, I would only pick up the phone to laugh at them.
Yeah, I don't get that fit either myself, especially with him not necessarily getting player club control. Like as we're
Hmm.
hearing that that's not as much going to be what you have to get with him, and that he would want to go there to that place seems just kind of strange to me. But
Yeah, and to be clear, I would pick up the phone to laugh at them because in this scenario, I'm Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh's that kind of guy. I
yeah,
wouldn't laugh at them because I'm a nice guy, but
Harbaugh's
Harbaugh
a
is not.
dick.
Yeah,
But yeah, offensive coordinator. So we'll see if his son's got what kind of offense his son runs and how he pushes that thing forward here for this team. That it's kind of going from some kind of air raid concepts to whatever they're going to go to now. I don't know what Arizona's runs for an offense. I don't know what the background there is, but
they're pretty pass heavy. They had what was that quarterback's name? Fafita. He would have these games where he just had like 500 passing yards. They go
oh,
crazy down there.
well, Carroll's gone. His son's gone the opposite way. And sometimes how it goes, man. They go the complete opposite of the dad on the approach. So it's kind of cool to see, though, and also really cool that I think you'll see some. Carroll being in the UW building can't do nothing but help the UW program if he's in there in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Garth Knight, thank you for the $5 donation. I appreciate you for that, Garth. It's great to see you tonight, brother. Says Killer Bees, love the discussion and want you both to know I've not given up on a jacuzzi collaboration between you two. You're gonna be left waiting on that one, brother.
Yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
that's we're not going that. No, it's on that one, guys. Thank you though for the donation, brother. Coda Dad, thank you for the $10 Canadian. Said I heard different takes on Schneider saying he's going to oversee assistant coaching selections. It sounded like he wanted to assemble the coaching staff himself. What head coach would go for that?
I find it very hard to believe that he actually means he's going to build the entire staff personally. Like, you're right. No head coach would want to be a part of a situation like that. That's awful.
Yeah. Would it not be fair to say that what he probably was meaning by when he said that? Because they're kind of taking it off a soundbite that was off of a question asked. What I think what he's meaning and he's saying that is if I'm a general manager and I have a coach that has assistant coordinators, I can go to that coach and say, you need to let this assistant coordinator go. He's not doing the job. That's something that does happen by general managers throughout the league. It's not unusual to see. Would you think that's a fair way of maybe what he meant by that, Brendan? Not that he's hiring him, but that if it comes down to 2 years down the line and there's a failing defensive part, he goes to the coach and goes, look, I know you love this guy. You got loyalty to this guy. I'm telling you right now, though, that you got to let him go. It ain't working.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe he's, the guy who ultimately makes the final decision, but that doesn't mean he won't have the utmost respect for the wishes of whoever gets hired. Like if you get Mike McDonald and he wants Anthony Weaver as his defensive coordinator, I'm sure you do everything you can to make that happen. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that I don't think he's going to do that at all. I know how people could take that take away from what Schneider said and kind of pull it that way, Coded Dad, but and it's good to hear Brendan feels the same way. I just think it's what he was talking about was more of that. I have the oversight to say to him if he needs to do this, but he was more speaking about that in the general terms, not in the, I think, active, I'm going to be out there assembling this staff like I'm Nick Fury and I'm trying to put the Avengers together. I don't think he's doing that.
Correct.
But thank you, Coda Dad. I appreciate you for the donation. Garth Knight, Taker 610, Don Mata. Very kind of you guys. One more here with John M429. Thank you for the $5 donation. It says Vrabel became high on my list after I saw the press conference before the Jags game because losing effing sucks. John referencing a press conference with Vrabel, a fiery press conference with Vrabel at the end of the season where he was asked, what did the reporter ask him? How did he get to that answer?
Oh man, what was it? I don't remember.
It was something along the lines that just, how does it, where are you at right now? How do you feel right now or something? And something stupid, a dumb media member would ask that's like, give it a little more thought, reporter,
Yeah.
give the question a little bit more, more than just like, so kind of just whatever pops in your head.
Yeah, I mean, Vrabel's okay, but I'm not super into it unless you're also getting Arthur Smith in the package. If not for that, I mean, nothing against Vrabel. He's got a nice little resume, but I kind of want somebody. I want to break away from the Pete Carroll stuff as much as humanly possible. I don't want
Mhm.
another kind of, emotional leader, cheerleader, get everybody pumped up type coach. I want somebody who's a little more of a little more nerdy, a little more of an X's and O's guy, a little bit more like a Mike McDonald.
Mhm.
And by the way, fun fact: Mike Vrabel had 1 year as a defensive coordinator in the NFL, and it was the worst defense in the league that year. How did that happen? How do you get promoted, do the worst job of anybody in the country, and then get another promotion? What is this, politics? Like, how did that happen?
You're a leader of men. You're a leader of men.
Yeah, leader of men to the 32nd ranked off defense in the NFL.
I think he had I thought he had something going there, but yeah, no, he was he definitely didn't have the greatest of years to earn necessarily that head coaching job there. What was it with Houston? I
Yeah.
think too though at the time that Houston in 2017 didn't have exactly, I think I could be wrong on this, but I forget where their defense was at. I don't know. Yeah, maybe they had Watt there at that time, right? They had
Yeah,
Clowney at that
yeah,
time. So
Watt, Clowney.
yeah.
Yeah, just want to. He did great work as a linebacker coach. He did great work at Ohio State, but that one, like, he got promoted to DC, and it was awful. And everyone was just like, "All right, let's just keep this guy on the track. Let's not modify the track at all." But
Yeah.
yeah, the Arthur Smith thing puts it over the edge to me. By the way, guys, people are talking about, oh, Derrick Henry, Derrick Henry, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was a bust for the first couple years of his career. Derrick Henry looked like another Trent Richardson for a couple years, and then that third year he started to get going, and it wasn't until Arthur Smith became the offensive coordinator that Derrick Henry became, all capital letters, Derrick Henry. So you got to give him some credit for that too, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's you bring up valid points about the fact you're getting a little bit more of the old school coach and the guy that's, not going to be as much of the pushing the offensive envelope, which, with our list, and I think where we're going to stand on this, that's really something that stands out to what we were wanting to do here. We've got some other ways we'll go, but that's something that I think is on both of our lists as a high priority. And I don't think Vrabel and Arthur Smith even coming in there would bring that. I think they would be damn effective. And I think that I do feel like with Vrabel, I have a little bit of I know what I'm getting factor here. I know what I am. And I do look at the Tennessee job and feel like he did maximize everything out there. Tannehill this last year, I think, had the number one highest cap hit in all of the NFL in what he cost, true value to the cap of the Titans this year. Last year, I believe it was number 2. He's had an offensive line that's slowly aged. Arthur Smith's moved on. The front office has made some weird moves and not really reinvigorating that offensive line in the proper way that they needed it to do so to keep that running game going where it needed to be. They made some weird, strange picks in the secondary. They traded out A.J. Brown for a net bad result on the other side of this. None of these things have to do with Mike Vrabel. None of these things I think Mike Vrabel wanted to see really go down in that way necessarily. And so I see what he's brought as a track record. I see he will probably bring in Arthur Smith with him. And I do look at what he does defensively, whereas, yes, offensively, he's maybe not setting the world on fire in his schemes and whatnot. I will say offensively running the ball, Arthur Smith is as creative as you will find. Like the way he runs it, he's every bit right there with Shanahan and his willingness to attack in every way, shape, and form when it comes to the running game. But defensively is where you do get from Vrabel a willingness to be updated and run things that are a little bit more in the forefront. And I'll tell you this much, he gets those guys to play hard. There's the biggest thing that we don't talk about, Brendan, that I think that does have to sometimes factor in our mind, and that I forget about this too, is that the getting through to these young players, the guy that can get through versus so many of these other coaches that we see across the landscape that are having a hard time resonating with this crop of generation of player. And to find a guy that's been able to do that, and maybe perhaps able to do that specifically because of his track record having playing in the sport and knows what will fly and what won't fly and what he can push down on. I feel like he's got a little bit of that right balance to him at the end of the day where this makes a lot of sense. And I think you're getting Arthur Smith with him, Brendan. I think it is a combination deal because that's why I wanted to walk you at that at the front of this, because I knew that would weigh heavily in your mind on this. Yeah. And I think I can sell it to you on it if you break it down that way of like, well, he's got the Raiders. He's got, who else would be a team? Obviously not Atlanta. But
clearly,
a couple of offensive coordinator jobs out there, and then you got this one with all of the talent he has with being a running head coach who wants to run the football, and he's got his 2 tackles taken care of, and he's got his 2 backs ready to go, and he's got Schneider and Vrabel telling him, "We're gonna get you some interior offensive line now too." So we'll get that all straight and forward. I mean, like it becomes to me just where he'll be like, yeah, he'll be frothing at the mouth. I think at that point to come to Seattle.
Yeah, no, I'm for it. I made a whole video a few days ago about the idea of a Mike Vrabel, Arthur Smith package and how I found it to be very appealing. I think it's a great idea. But if you're just talking about Vrabel in isolation, there's only so excited I can be about it.
I get it. I get it. And the points you raised, I think, are complete valid points, especially when we consider at least one of the other guys we're going to be looking at here on this upcoming list, which I think our list might go right together here on these final two. We'll see where it stands. Let's get to your number 2 on the list for Brendan.
Yeah,
Search.
Okay, I went with Ben Johnson, the classic, everybody's favorite. Everybody's excited about this guy. Like this is the guy that would make just about everybody in this fan base happy. He's 38 years old, 2 years as a very successful offensive coordinator in Detroit under Dan Campbell, taking over for an offense that was not that good before he got there, by the way.
No, it was not.
8th in EPA this year, 6th in EPA the previous year, 5th in points per game both years. Year before that, he was a passing game coordinator and tight end coach for TJ Hawkinson. Year before, tight end coach for TJ Hawkinson. So he was part of the TJ Hawkinson development. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like he made TJ Hawkinson a great player, because TJ Hawkinson was a top 10 pick, very talented player. But he did some good work there. He was a assistant wide receiver coach at Miami when they had the immortal Jarvis Landry, Kenny Stills, and Devontae Parker combo going. Great times there in Miami.
Oh, yeah.
Also kind of helped sort of dug Ryan Tannehill's career out of the dumpster and put it in a little bit of a better place before he went to Tennessee and truly broke out. So he did okay work with Tannehill as a quarterback coach. I'm not going to go crazy about it, but it was all right. And yeah, it's not a very long resume, admittedly, right? I mean, I kind of just went over the whole thing. He spent the last 3 years in Detroit. He spent the previous 5-6 years in Miami. 7 years in Miami, and that's about it. But this work he's done in Detroit is good. And sometimes when you want to get the best possible coaching talent, you got to take a chance on them when they're young and inexperienced, because by the time they're experienced, someone already took the chance on them, and you're never going to get them ever at that point. It's over.
Agreed. Well stated. I think that it's if you're going to say, Brendan, that there is if you have a Seahawks fan that came up to you and said, Brendan, give me the Sean McVay of this offseason available as a coaching candidate, who's the closest Sean McVay that exists out there, would you point to Ben Johnson as that guy?
He certainly mimics it the most. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Sean McVay was part of some really impressive coaching crews that I don't think Ben Johnson has been in. Like, McVay was there with LaFleur. McVay was there with Shanahan. And Ben Johnson doesn't have that, but it's still pretty dang good what he was able to accomplish these last 2 years in Detroit. And sometimes that just needs to be enough. And I know it's easy for us to say as fans, not so easy for somebody like John Schneider, who might live or die by this hire. But most of these hires, you're taking some kind of risk here. Unless you get somebody like Vrabel or Harbaugh, there is no just gun it in there safe option.
I agree. I've kind of labeled it. I think Ben Johnson's the biggest boom or bust candidate. You're not going for the high floor here. You're going for the wild potential that you get with this guy. And you talk about that 7 years in Miami. 3 different offensive coordinators through that time, coached 3 different positions through that time, tight end, wide receivers, quarterbacks. This is a guy that trained under Mike Sherman, one of the forefathers of the true West Coast offense. He then learned underneath one of the fathers. It was like going from one of the godfathers to one of the fathers in Bill Lazar, who helped kind of continue him on. He's got, to me, you've got elements of his offensive system, Brendan, that have both been instructed by a Chip Kelly all the way to a Mike Martz in the influences that are at play. He is a guy that is kind of, a mad chemist in the lab in coming up with he's coming up with. He is not a one system guy that's just, this is my system, this is how I run it. He's going to take from everywhere he can possibly take from to make this at its best, whatever it sort of takes, so to speak. I mean, even last year, Brendan, coming off that season you talked about, which, just to again reiterate the numbers that you posted, which I think are very important with Ben Johnson, 2021 under the old offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, they were 22nd in yards, 25th in points, 29th in offensive DVOA. The very next year, he takes him to 9th in DVOA, 3rd in yards, 5th in points. Then that offseason goes and has a 3-day summit with Sean McVay. a melding of the minds together between these two guys. How can I even get better? I mean, the ego that usually exists in the sport, and I don't need Sean McVay. Look where I'm at. Look where I'm at. But then goes back and says, no, like there's more to learn. Let me get more. Let me peel some more out of him. How did best get more out of Jared Goff here? What did you do in using that? And he's done different stuff with Jared than what Sean did. He doesn't rigid Jared up. He's given Jared so much more control and expanded him as a quarterback than what McVay did. And so I look at what he's done in all of his systems and understanding he's willing to do so much stuff when it comes to the ground game. I don't know if there's another offensive coach that pulls more guys across the formation post snap as in the run game, Brendan. I mean, he will just pull the whole right side of the line and send it all left back across his left guard and his left tackle. It feels like sometimes watching some of these cut-ups. But he's awesome. He's offensive passing attack is on the back of option routes, which I love. I mean, especially when you're playing zone, read the defender's leverage. Turn off the leverage. Quarterback, receiver, read the same leverage. It's not complicated. And when you get the soft zone based defenses, Brendan, you know those types, right? Those cover 3 type defenses that love to sit back in those deep zones. When I'm operating off leverage looks, it becomes impossible for them to cover, right? I run up at Bobby. I cut this way if he's out here. If he's out here, I cut that way. Simple and easy. And that's why it's so simple and easy to attack that style of defense. But I love Ben Johnson. I think he's a bright, bold candidate. And he'd be a big swing, but you said at the top of this, we're not married to any of these guys. And why not try to take the swing that can put it up into the second deck? Hell, maybe and clear the whole stadium.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this one. If we got this one, it would be the most exciting. There is risk involved, but like I say, there's very little we can do right now that isn't risky. There's very little we can do that is going to just guarantee success.
Amen. There is no certain move. There is no certainty here in this territory. Well, since we both had the very same number 2, it makes me wonder if we might just both have the same number 1. Brendan, who is your number 1 coaching candidate for the Seattle Seahawks in this future?
Well, I want to be clear. I don't know if I see this one happening. I don't know if this one's in the cards, but we got to dream big while we have room to dream, right? Mm-hmm. Because in about a month, we're going to have a coach and the dreams will be dead. We'll just have reality, right?
That's right.
So we got to dream big. So I did list number 1, Jim Harbaugh. I don't know how number 1 could be anybody else. This guy is, not only is he relatively speaking a sure thing because he's already been ridiculously successful in the NFL as a head coach, but he's also proven to have a very high ceiling. This isn't some safe, not sexy hire like Mike McCarthy. Like, let's say McCarthy got fired and we hired McCarthy, it would have been sold as like, yeah, it's not sexy, but it's safe. He would have guaranteed us the playoffs pretty much every year. He would have guaranteed us regular season success. That's not the case with Harbaugh. Harbaugh guarantees you a little more than that, I think. He really could not have done much better in Frisco, couldn't have done much better at Michigan. Couple of not so great years in Michigan, I guess, but every year he had was better than even Brady Hoke at his best, right? Brady Hoke didn't have years like that.
No.
Stanford couldn't have done much better than he did. Even as the Oakland Raiders quarterback coach couldn't have done much better than he did. So, like, this guy's resume is pretty much impeccable. I know people are like, oh, you didn't win the Super Bowl. You know what? He had Colin Kaepernick and Alex Smith as his quarterbacks. I wouldn't win the Super Bowl either with those quarterbacks.
Yeah. No.
So, sign me up.
Yeah, and it's my number 1 here as well for all of the reasons that Brendan just said. You get certainty and you get the upside, which there's no other coach that provides this of any of the candidates. So then how can it not be the number 1 priority? And if you want to talk about bringing a guy who is not going to get shy about being cast in the great big shadow that Coach Carroll is going to cast over the top of the next head coach, this would be that type of guy who's got he's not going to shy away. He's going to step boldly to the forefront here and take this challenge on 100%. He has got one last coaching chapter in his book that he wants to write, and that's winning a championship. He will be here to win. It's about getting to championships. It's not consistent money. I'm going to get this team to a championship. And he will make it happen, I think, or at least he'll get very close to doing it if he don't do it. And I have a lot of confidence in that fact with Jim Harbaugh. Is he a prickly guy? Sure. Is he maybe going to grind people out in a couple of years? Yeah, probably. But that's okay if it comes with the greatest of success. And as you said in San Francisco, it's very hard to hold a guy like that responsible for not getting them a Super Bowl number 1. you talk about having Kaepernick at quarterback number 2. He happened to also go against one of a legendary teams we've had in NFL history during that 3-year run there that they're having to go through at the same time being us. That wasn't exactly helping him. The other thing you had to consider about Harbaugh is how many that team got old quick. Justin Smith, Navarro Bowman with the catastrophic knee injury in the conference championship game, Patrick Willis retiring early due to the dodgy toe stuff that he had going on. Them losing they lost some secondary guys. It kind of got plucked really quick. Remember, they had that right tackle they had taken the first round who was really good, and then he just suddenly retired and was kind of like, I'm out at this point. Everything.
Oh God,
Anthony Johnson, something Johnson.
Maybe I remember they had the Chris Borland guy, the linebacker who was like rookie of the year, and then he retired after 1 year.
Yeah,
I remember that. I don't remember the right tackle who retired quickly. I can't remember his name.
He was good, and it was a real shocker when he went out, and then he tried to come back like a year later and unretire. But he was good for them, and it created a hole for them on their offense, and people kind of did figure out Kaepernick too, as they started to get more film on him and his limitations, to your point. But to me, Harbaugh is your slam dunk here. This is the no doubter. This is the one that he takes this team and instantly maximizes this talent to the utmost. His defensive scheme will run Mike McDonald's essential defensive scheme here. So it's an updated, modernized defense. You get the McDonald. Hell, you might get Wink Martindale, the guy that taught, for all we know, McDonald in this defense. Not that Wink's great at this point. I'm just illustrating that you're going to get a fun defense to play with. Now, offensively, it's going to be a little bit more meat and potatoes, but he pulls that meat and potatoes off. His running game will hit you from all angles. He's going to be physical. He's going to win at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, these are things that are direly needed. Discipline. All these things are direly needed on this team in recent years, I think. And so he really brings these biggest weaknesses, maybe even to a place of being a strength, and almost fairly immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we get Harbaugh, I would anticipate him being out of here within 5 years, because that's just the way it goes when he has to deal with a GM. But it would be an incredible 5 years. And it's like dating Derek Jeter. You're not going to be it's not going to be a long-term relationship. He's going to move on, but it's going to be a lot of fun while you're there.
Or a teenager dating Leonardo. It's like second year turning 20, it's over with.
Yeah, he's got the chip in the hand like in Logan's Run.
Totally. Yeah, you got another 10 days. 20 years old. It's any time for me at that one.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that? Let's have a good 5 years and then go get another coach in 5 years. Don't be sad that it's over. Be happy that it happened. And let me be clear. I don't think Harbaugh's happening. He would want GM power in all likelihood. We wouldn't give that to him. I don't think John would work well with him anyway. I think that that kind of personality, those guys would butt heads a little bit. But if we're talking about, the dream, give me Jim Harbaugh and let's go win some titles.
Amen. I think that's what you said about John's true. And John mentions about wanting to keep a positive environment here, positive culture. Of course, with John, I mean, it's maybe sometimes positive, sometimes it's negative, so like you're going to get a bit of both. But the likelihood is maybe not as much of it having happened. But if the pursuit here is to just find the best candidate for the job and to not take that kind of thing into account, which, we're not the guys having to work with them day to day like John would, right? Like, you guys can say it. I'm the guy who's got to go in there every day to the office and right? So I like, how's the view, Brendan and Brandon, from the cheap seats, right? Like, so I get that. I can sympathize with that standpoint on it, but there is not just another candidate to me that's close to him in what he brings. Ben Johnson, maybe with the boom if he hits it, but the bust is just as possible. And so that really does draw me to Jim.
Yeah. And is it possible that he's chilled out a little bit after that decade he spent at Michigan? He's an older guy now. Is it possible that he's not the guy who would like take somebody's blood and wipe it all over his face when he's giving his pregame talk? Like maybe, you got to settle down a little bit as you get older, right?
I've wondered this as well, Brendan, because the whole thing about burning people out, did he burn people out at Stanford? Has he burned people out at Michigan? I mean, the coaching staff he didn't burn out. They loved him. He had remember that after the win this year at Ohio State, he had the coach that was filling in for him, like, this is for you, Jim. Like that's not for a guy that's supposed to be bearing people out. I've never heard any of his coaches talk really badly about him. His former players seem to, revere and respect him. So that whole, I think to your point, this burned out thing, or that he's absolutely a guy that's just nothing but just a bunch of, just a hard ass kind of. I don't know if that's as much a fair assessment of where he is. It does seem like I've heard a little bit of him doing he's grown a little bit. He's softened a little bit with age, and we all do that at times. That happens to everybody a little bit with age. You lose a little bit of that testosterone goes down a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah, I can get behind that. It's just he's 60 now. He's like he's by far the oldest candidate I looked at so far. Like, how can you be still that amped up at 60 years old? That's hard, man.
It's hard. It's hard to be that angry that long. You eventually wear out. You're like, especially when you start getting the pelts. I got the national title. I've been in the Super Bowl. Oh, he knows what he can do now. There's less of that. What can I pull off? What can't I?
Yeah, and maybe we could get a little love from the NFL setting up another brother Super Bowl in a year or two.
That's what I'm saying. Let's take advantage of the script. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Let's get ahead of the script, Brendan. Let's not be the script. Let's get ahead of the script. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what I'm really truly advocating for here.
Right.
Corey Olson, thank you for the $5 donation. I appreciate you for that. Corey says, why did Bijan Robinson only have 4 touchdowns? That guy's an animal. Explain the reasoning between not going hard with your best player. Arthur Smith was trash.
I'd be trash too if my quarterback was Desmond Ridder.
Yeah, as we saw this year, I mean, I think, Corey, there's certainly a fair assessment to be said in saying that you should have utilized Bijan Robinson way more than you did, Arthur. Totally fair. You're going to draft a running back in the top 10 of a draft, then lean on the guy from day one. I wouldn't pick anything away from that, Corey, in any way, shape, or form. But to Brendan's point on this is, as we've seen in time, if you have a quarterback that can convert the third downs, that can keep the chains moving, much less provide offensive success, and you have a team that's behind the 8 ball and behind the games a lot of times, now you're not able to lean as much on the rushing attack. And I think that those were 2 elements that came into play, especially this year for that Atlanta Falcon team, that prevented them as much from leaning back in on that running of the football. There's a fairness to say, again, that he should have gotten more in Bijan. I expected way more out of him this year in that attack, but it does make it hard, those 2 elements, when you don't have consistent drives and your defense can't get off the field because it's not particularly good. And, I think the overall track record with Arthur is that he will do a good job if you give him good basic parts to work with.
And let him focus on one thing. Let him focus on the offense. He's a bad head coach. Oh, well, there are a lot of great coordinators who are bad head coaches.
It's very true. There's a lot of guys just need to stay in that lane and not leave it. And that's where they could be the best in the sport at that, but you put them in the head coach and they're quickly overmatched. And I agree with Brendan on this one. I think, Corey, it's a little bit of that going on with Arthur. I think you give him this offensive talent, he will draw this offense into probably at the very least a top 10 state immediately, if not more so. He'll certainly make the ground game a whole hell of a lot more effective than it's been.
Yeah, the Titans offense in 2020 was 4th in points and 2nd in EPA with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback.
Crazy.
That was what? They had A.J. Brown and what was the name of the bust? Corey Davis at wide receiver.
That's right.
Yeah, like Corey Davis was good, I guess. Jonnu Smith was the tight end, I think.
That's right.
He was good, but remember, Arthur Smith developed Jonnu Smith. He was nothing, and he was the tight end coach, and Jonnu Smith developed under him by and large. So that was not great talent in Tennessee. They had a better offensive line than we do, granted. But Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown and like it's really not that great. Like we've got our receivers are much better than the receivers they had in Tennessee at that point.
Agreed. Yeah, I think so. I think you very well could be giving him his most talented team he's had ever as a coordinator when Arthur comes in here. One of the reasons I think it'll be so attractive to him. Appreciate you, Corey. Garth, thank you for another $5 donation. Very kind of you, Garth. Says, wacky question here. Why hire a great offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator as head coach? Hire them as OC or DC and pay them head coach money. That's actually a good question.
That's what Jerry Jones has done with Dan Quinn, kind of. So it works, but there's no accounting for that coordinator going, you know what? I wanted my chance as a head coach. Like, I'll take the same amount of money or even a little less money for my chance to be a head coach, because if I crack in as a head coach and I'm actually good, then I make generational wealth.
Yeah. On top of, I think, don't you think there's a bit of this on your viewpoint in historical terms? It's like, if you want to go and be a great coach in this league, it's hard to be remembered as the great coordinator out there. It's, you want to go get your name put kind of on the books, you got to go do it by being a head coach.
Mhm.
And so it's just a natural progression that I think you eventually, even if you're paying for the high end guy, Garth, that guy's going to want to have that pull to, like you mentioned with Dan Quinn, as proven with him. He's kind of flirted the past couple off seasons with still leaving, despite the fact, Jerry's paying him very well and would love to have him, remain there. So, I think it'd be great in theory to pull that off, Garth, if you could. I think it's harder though to pull that off because that guy, if there's a guy, because what you're kind of saying, Garth, is you could go get a head coaching job somewhere, this offensive coordinator, but instead come here, be an offensive coordinator for us, and we'll pay you as much, if not more, than what you've gotten as being a head coach. And I just don't know if there's a lot of those guys out there that would really be willing to do that. Is even this offseason, what jumps out to me, there's not that many viable candidates on a yearly basis. You are kind of really pulling through some of the lesser at times stock out there.
Yeah, and also remember, teams are capable of blocking interviews if you're trying to interview them for a lateral move.
Right.
Like, we're seeing that right now with the Viro in Carolina. Or, by the way, I looked it up. There are literally 5 different pronunciations on the internet that swear they are the right pronunciation for a gyro, a Viro, which I believe that's actually correct. That's what he said it was, but who the hell knows?
A gyro, a Viro. God,
Yeah.
That's a hard one to get out.
Yeah, but Carolina's blocking interviews with him for defensive coordinator because you can do that if it's lateral. So if you want him, you have to get him as a head coach. I assume that if somebody tried to interview Mike McDonald as a defensive coordinator, Baltimore would block it.
Right. That's something that's been raised to me by a few people on my channel in recent days doing live streams, Brendan, is let's take Ben Johnson and we'll hire this guy as a head coach, and then we'll just sign Ben Johnson over here as the offensive coordinator, or we'll take Dave Canales and bring him in as the offensive coordinator. And I just keep the teams they're under contract. You can't do that. A guy can be under contract as an offensive coordinator, become a head coach, but he can't be under contract as an offensive coordinator, go be another offensive coordinator in another place. Teams are not going to let a guy go because they're a good one. If they're going somewhere else, they're a good one. They don't want to let a good coach go for nothing and no reason, So it's good theory, Garth. It totally is. But yeah, unfortunately, just in practice doesn't tend to play out that way.
Right.
Garth, thank you for another $5 donation. I appreciate you for all your support. Harbaugh also brought in Ric Flair to hype up the Niners before the playoff game. So he's not all that bad. That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, he does seem like the kind of coach who knows how to do that kind of stuff, knows how to really tap in on that level.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. He's a guy that's part of getting his guys. You watch it play hard and getting them to buy in. And I think that this is going to become more of a bigger thing that NFL teams are struggling with, Brendan, as the newer generation comes along, as the older generations go out, is how do we get these guys to buy in? We saw it in our team this year, all across the board. We saw it all on the field, Brendan, and times business decisions being made, but we also saw it in the lack of leadership. It's both of those things. How do you get the full buy-in across the board in that way? And he seems to be able to do it. But that's a cool note, Garth, that he got Ric Flair in there, and that's a hell of a move by Harbaugh to get a team hyped up for a playoff game.
Yeah.
So we've looked at our top 5, and Garth, thank you again for all your donations. We've looked at the top 5 here on this list for us, and I think there's a good little opening 5 list. We're not going to go through these guys too far as a deep dive, Brendan, but do you have a couple of other guys here on your list that maybe aren't being talked about as much that you think should maybe be given a little bit more heat, that they're just kind of being taken as just kind of an all-star ran or not even considered maybe?
Well, I'll say this, because of what I was talking about earlier, about how you can't really know how these guys are going to be as leaders of men until they actually get the job. And if you're in the interview with them, maybe you can get some kind of inclination. So I'm looking at Ben Johnson, who we already talked about, Dave Canales, who we already talked about, and another guy would be Bobby Slowick of Houston. Maybe all 3 of those guys are kind of the same thing. They're great offensive minds, but who knows if they can lead men? And maybe if you're making a decision between those 3 guys, let's say for a second, Schneider is making a decision between those 3 guys. You probably wouldn't make that decision based off who had better offensive numbers as a coordinator. You're probably making that decision off of, well, all 3 are good, so let me try to get a feel for who would be the best leader. And that's more abstract. That's something you're going to try to infer from the interview. So I don't want to dismiss the likes of a Bobby Slowick in this conversation, a guy who has had a pretty good amount of success early in his career, a guy who is very young, a guy who hasn't done a ton in terms of length of his resume, kind of like Ben Johnson, kind of like Canales. And I want to be open to the fact that one of those guys might be better than Ben Johnson just because of that leadership angle. It's just really hard for us to know. So I don't want a guy like Bobby Slowick to just be completely dismissed here.
How do you ascertain in interviewing a guy the leadership aspect of things?
I mean, that's the hard part. I don't know. I've never been in one of these head coaching interviews before. That's the
Yeah.
thing, right? But you're trying to infer it based off little things that you can pick up, how they talk to you, how they engage with you. It's like, I've been in job interviews for things that have nothing to do with football before, of course.
Mhm.
So, I know that these recruiters are looking for certain attributes that might not be immediately evident on a resume. That's why they invite you in the first place, right? They want to
Right.
look at you. They want to see what kind of person you are face to face. So I don't want to dismiss somebody like a Bobby Slowick, who is another one of these young hotshot offensive guru types. He doesn't have the results of Ben Johnson, but what if the results are good enough and then they go, you know what, we got better vibes off of this guy. So I
Yeah.
don't want to dismiss that.
I've been referencing with Slowick and Canales. I think we talked about this earlier on, that they're coaches that are the equivalent of like I know we were thinking about Cam Ward coming this draft. It's like Cam Ward, you give him the third round, but if he goes back to school, he probably is able to come back and maybe even push into the top of the first round if he has a really good year, depending on the program that he goes to. And that's a little bit of like what I look at with Slowick or Dave Canales, where I think that they're a year behind Ben Johnson, where Ben's got the 2 years as coordinating, the 2 years of great success, where he's really shown it's not a one-off or this year, just kind of everything, went in the right direction as far as everything synced up, and it won't the next year. But that you could be getting or trying to get out ahead of these guys and going, hey, if they're going to be a matter of a year down the line, we can anticipate this, then let's jump on it now. And Slowick is that kind of guy with the job he's done with Houston. That's not a stacked Houston offense. And Stroud, to both of our eyes, I think we thought was going to need a year. And we even thought, I think it was going to be best to give him a year on the bench. Yet he's got him going out there playing like a top 5 quarterback year one. And that is incredible work.
Right. I don't hate the idea of a Viro outside of the fact that he is a defensive guy, which we're trying to kind of get away from. But I think his resume is actually really good. He was under McVay in LA for several years. He was under Raheem Morris. He was part of that tree as well. I don't hate the idea of a Viro if we do go defensive. He's not as good as McDonald, but I think he did great work that 1 year in Denver, and he did some really good stuff in LA before then. So, by the way, also another Harbaugh tree guy, actually. He was under Harbaugh in San Fran for a little bit.
Yeah, it always stands out when you get a guy of not only the job they do coming into the place, but then how the place is when they leave and what they then do with the same talent. And you look at Denver with a Viro and what he was able to do last year with that Denver defense, last couple of years there with that Denver defense, even when the offense was doing the 3 and outs and exhausting that crew. And then look at what happened with Sean Payton this year and the 70-point burger that defense gave up against Miami, which Evero's defenses never would have come close to giving something up like that. It makes you appreciate the job he did that much more. And I do he's a guy that, like you said, I'm a lean offensive, but I do have a little bit of a strange kind of affinity for what you see in Viro and the job he did. And, he would take you over to the full Vic Fangio defense. He's one of the few guys like Staley did with the Rams, or Sean Desai did that with that 1 year with the Bears, in that actually able to make the scheme work and make it run well instead of just running it. Right. Mm-hmm. Which is sometimes what a little bit of what we get. Can you please talk me through why Raheem Morris makes any sense?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tougher one. His resume is not terrible, but he's already got his chance as a head coach, and he kind of flunked out, right? It was bad, really bad, like Arthur Smith bad, pretty much. Maybe worse, honestly.
Yeah.
He has had a decent amount of success in LA. He did do some things pretty well in Atlanta. I guess it's kind of like a Mike McCarthy hire. It's like safe. You're going to make the playoffs probably with him. You're going to get better on defense with him. He wore a lot of different hats in Atlanta. He was a wide receiver coach, pass game coordinator, which is really weird for a defensive guy. You don't see that often. He did some great work with defensive backs in Tampa Bay. That was the Rondé Barber, Brian Kelly, Tenard Jackson, Jermaine Phillips group. He helped develop Aqib Talib. It's not a bad resume at all. But like even in LA, it's not like they were winning because of their defense. If anything, he took over the number one defense in the league by far under Brandon Staley and made it a decent unit. It's not like he improved on it. It was just kind of good. So
Well, I mean, I even look
I don't
at
know. It's boring. It's kind of boring, ain't it?
Well, I think he's even. I'd say that they even went back steps. That he wasn't even able to keep like Wilkes was able to basically keep things the way they were under D'Amico Ryans with the Niners. I would argue that with Raheem Morris, the team has taken defensively a step backwards with him there. Okay, this year their talent wasn't great. They're rebuilding. So you look at him as 19th in yards, 21st in points allowed. It makes sense, right? Okay, I get it. Last year, Aaron Donald out a lot of the year. You're 20th in yards, 19th in points. Okay, I understand it. You still had some other talent, but okay. Let's go to your Super Bowl year. 17th in yards, 15th in points allowed. Like
ninth in EPA.
Ninth in EPA, but
that's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
But they were 1-1 under Staley.
1-1. What do you mean?
First in points allowed, first in EPA per play.
Well, there's my thing. And so that's still a pretty hard drop from where they were. And I go to it and I go, considering that coaching background you talked about, 17-31 as a head coach with Tampa Bay. And it's a rich background. He's been in the league forever. But what is it about this guy right now that's earning him to get that job? It's like Arthur Smith. Let's use a comparison. It's like Arthur Smith going here to the Seattle Seahawks and for 3 seasons churning out a 15th ranked offense and going, okay, now he's a head coaching candidate.
I mean, honestly, he was their passing game coordinator in Atlanta when they were every year elite passing. Maybe we're looking at it like that. I don't know. It's tough. I can't really explain it. I'd say maybe you could get Morris as your head coach and Eviro as your defensive coordinator, but apparently you can't even do that because Carolina's blocking it. Yeah. So yeah, Raheem Morris, I wouldn't hate it, but that's because, life's too short to hate things. Realistically, I know we can do better. That's what I'm going to say about a lot of these hires. I don't hate that many of them, but most of them I look at it and I'm like, I'm sure we can do better.
I think I would hate the Raheem Morris hire.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you're going to hire somebody bad, hire somebody really bad. Or like Raheem Morris probably is another one of these high floor guys that guarantees you 6 or 7 wins. Like, go for the home run. And if you don't hit, you go 2-15 and you get the number 1 pick and you're getting Deion Sanders' kid or whoever ends up the number 1 pick. I don't know who it's going to be.
Manning in a couple of years.
Manning in a couple of years. Like that's what the Bengals did, right? They fired Marvin Lewis. The next year they go 2-14 and they get Joe Burrow. And then they go 4-11 and 4-12 or whatever. And then they get Jamar Chase and boom, Super Bowl. Like, what's wrong with that?
No, I got no issues with it. So there are some guys I'd like for most part where you're at, where most of these guys are going, okay, all right, I'm okay with that. I get it. But there's been a couple, that one, the Graham one that they're interviewing from Oakland, just as a Raiders DC, did a little bit better work this last year. I'll give them that. But there's not enough there to be, it's like you grabbed a random coordinator out of a hat with that one. I feel like a little bit on that one. So I'm just kind of like,
he was the defensive coordinator the year Miami was tanking for Tua.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I saw. 30th in yards allowed with Miami, 32nd in points allowed with them in that year.
32nd in EPA allowed too.
It's just no. You know what I mean? No, Brendan. Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here?
These guys get to fail up. You should. Yeah, you shouldn't get to fail up.
This doesn't work this way. This is not the copacetic for me. I don't. Come on, we can do better than just that one. Graham with Oakland. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, a lot of these guys, I'd rather just promote Waldron. Like I think I'd rather,
much. Yeah,
I'd rather promote Waldron than get somebody like Raheem Morris. I think
it would too. Well, I want an offensive-minded coach. Let's also remember that with Raheem, on top of having a bit of a middling defense recently and a poor head coaching career in his other stops. He's also a defensive-minded head coach. At least with Waldron, you have a guy that is offensively minded driven, and especially if you were to know that Waldron was being held back in recent years from running the full Rams offensive attack in a way that he's now not going to be. But I'm not with that one. How about Mike Kafka? He get you
Uh,
excited?
that's a really interesting one, right? It's like kind of like he's jumping the line in front of Eric
Yeah.
Bieniemy, who's just kind of being left out in the cold here, never gets an interview no matter what.
Yeah.
And realistically, you'd think he'd be the next guy up, and Kafka would be the guy who still has to actually like prove himself from the Randy Reed tree. But Kafka would be like trying to hit a 700-foot home run. I admit you're probably going to miss the ball, but you hit it. I'm not against anybody who fell off the Andy Reid tree, but man, I mean, the stuff in New York was not good, obviously, but I don't know how much I can kill him for that. He had no receivers, didn't really have much of a quarterback. I don't like Saquon. I think Saquon sucks. I'm not a fan.
He's injured a
Uh,
lot. Minimum.
yeah. So not much to work with there. And my understanding is that Brian DeBole is like the hardest person in the world to work with. It's like,
He seems like an a-hole.
yeah, he seems like a complete dick. So maybe
Every
there's a
time they
little
go
bit
to
of that
him,
going on here.
every time they go to the sideline, he's over there screaming or making a face at the quarterback or at somebody on the sideline. Like he's got no composure over there to keep it
Mm-mm,
together. It's like a
mm-mm.
live wire.
Yeah. But if we got Kafka, that would to me kind of be like the hire that like, okay, this might end up in 2-15. This might end up in the number 1 overall pick.
Yes.
But I'm okay with that. I can live with that because the upside is still there. And I'd kind of rather do that than Raheem Morris.
Yeah, I think if I had to be drawn between the two, I probably would lean there. I certainly, as you said, with a look at the job he's done with the New York Giants, you don't say, well, you haven't had the best of parts. That's fair, but you've also not gotten the most out of necessarily what you've had there either on the other side of it. But I'm just as much the anti Raheem Morris. And let's also acknowledge this thing too that you're doing by Raheem Morris. You're handing the Rams 2 third-round compensatory picks.
That's true.
Let's just be ultimately sure here. If we're going to make the team that's been owning us here for the last 4 years overall, better on the back of 2 picks by taking one of their coaches, who, they just go from him back to Staley, Brendan, right? Staley's on the open market. Staley comes back to LA. They get better at their defensive coordinator position. You give them 2 third-round picks, and you maybe get much worse as a head coaching job. So that's one of the reasons with Raheem. Just no, please no. No.
Yeah, let's get an offensive head coach and then get Brandon Staley as our defensive coordinator instead. How about that?
Yeah, there we
How
go.
about we cut off the Rams at the pass? They want to do
right.
it.
That's right. That's exactly. Cut it off the pass is the right way to put it. So I'd much rather go that route than the other because, Jesus, oh my God. I saw the Raheem Morris one. I went, what? Huh? Mm-hmm. Is there any other candidates on your list that you've got that maybe are worth speaking about?
Well, I mean, we don't really need to talk about Dan Quinn anymore because we've already talked that one to death, I guess. Do we?
No, yeah. I think everybody's kind of aware of him and what he is and where he's at.
Yeah.
And...
I'm a big fan of not letting one game make or break your view of something or somebody or some entity, but it was a tough game to get around mentally, right? It's tough to look at that and not feel a certain way. Like it's like he doesn't believe in linebackers. Like Dan Quinn doesn't believe in linebackers. It's against his religion to have real linebackers. All of his linebackers are safeties that he's converted to linebackers. It's weird.
Carroll had a weird thing with this too, Brendan, which is you go to the 2 tight ends in the 12 personnel, and defensively you say nothing of the fact the linebackers were weak and thin like you talked about, but then you're also running nickel up against 12 personnel. We did the same thing. It sort of puts you from a personnel standpoint on the team. It's like, would you run dime defense against 3 wide receiver sets? Well, no, that would put us in a not an advantageous position from a defensive standpoint. Okay, well, this is the same thing. Why are you running nickel with 2 tight ends? And we did a little bit of that too, Brendan. And you watch that game. I felt like, Brendan, that was very similar as a game, defensively speaking, to ones that we've seen here in Seattle recently for when it went wrong with the defense, when it started to go sideways. And it has me in a position of just being like, it's not just off the one game. There's other stuff with Dan in addition to this. Defensive-minded head coach. His record absent Shanahan. Shanahan might have been the secret sauce to get him to the success he got in Atlanta, really, if you look at it. And once he was removed of that there was not as much success to be had. He does give you, I think, that high floor thing. So you don't get that potential you're talking about with Kafka that you would have had like the 2. He's going to get you 5, 6, 7 wins, but not enough to be, truly bad, not enough to be very good. And you're kind of back into, I think, the Carroll basket a little bit. Too much with Quinn than you would be otherwise. And I think that's the point of moving on from Carroll, is to go to something different and new, not to remain in the old, or you would have just kept Coach Carroll.
Right. People are talking about Aaron Glenn. I don't get that one. Like, Detroit's defense is bad. Like he's getting, he's doing some stuff that's impressive, but I don't think he needs to be a head coach yet.
No, well, their corners don't technically play very good tech. They're not fundamentally sound. They trouble at times. Just footwork's not good. Like, they get turned around. I don't get that one either.
Brian Johnson, that train seems pretty off the rails right now after the Philadelphia game.
Yeah, I think that one's probably going to be. I mean, hell, he's going to be. Maybe I'm hearing they might flip out both coordinators there this offseason. That was the way that Sirianni's going to stay, is that they're going to potentially change out of both. So, if you're being let go of your last job, probably not a good indication you're getting a promotion to the next.
It's probably a little too early here, but Todd Monken.
He's a guy that does get mentioned. I haven't spent as much time diving into him as I probably should have, Brendan, because he's probably a guy that should be given a lot more respect by what he's done with Lamar and taking him forward as a quarterback there. Because he's truly doing quarterback things, not just running back, playing the quarterback position as he was there with Roman as the coordinator. He did a great job. Probably should be talked about a lot more. And I'll tell you this, Brendan, if the Ravens do win a Super Bowl, you probably will hear Monken brought in a little bit more than he's being talked about right now. He does interest me a little bit. I haven't done as much to dive on him. I've been looking at other candidates so far, but he does interest me. I like what I've seen from him.
I did do a write-up on Eric Bieniemy, but that one seems kind of DOA. There's just something there that's just not clicking. There's not, I don't know. It's a scarlet letter. He's got the scarlet letter.
Does he got some incriminating pictures somewhere that the NFL is aware of and they're keeping under wraps, but that's keeping him from being a head coach? Is that what it is?
I know that the Andy Reid tree has not had the most success, but I find it very weird that one of these sad sack teams doesn't at least give him a shot, right?
They get hired at least, right?
Yeah.
Whether they have success or not, they all get hired. I mean, it's one way or another, and you mentioned the Kafka jumping you imagine Bieniemy when he turns on his computer in the morning, he's like, Mike Kafka, interview request with the Seattle. Mike Kafka? The quarterback coach for us? The quarterback coach?
Guy who's got me croissants every morning?
Yeah. I literally scouted him.
Yeah, I remember when Kafka was a player, too. I remember when he was the quarterback.
Do you remember the combine with him? Like, he was like that last quarterback in the combine where they show all the top guys. They're like, whoosh, whoosh, and then here comes the big, awkward 6'5", and he comes out and everything looks clunky and slow. And he's backup, career backup.
Yeah. I don't think I really had too much else that I've looked at so far. There are going to be a couple more names that I look at, some super, super low-key guys that I'm eventually going to have to look at, but I'm just because you may as well cover all your bases, not because I think there's any real chance. Like Steve Spagnuolo. Remember him?
He
was
Giants head coach.
No, he was the Giants DC when they won the Super Bowl.
Oh, that's right.
And then he became Rams head coach and was really bad.
That's right.
Maybe he's due for a second chance, but I really hope it's not here.
He's done great work with the Chiefs, so he has done a really fine job with them. And I mean that team needed to lean on that defense this year in ways they hadn't prior with Mahomes, and they've been pretty solid for years, but they really were able to give them a bit of a pillar this year defensively.
I still don't hate the Brian Flores idea. I don't think I like it, though, the more I look at it. It's a defensive guy. I like what he's doing, though. I really do like what he did this year in Minnesota, but maybe it's not head coaching material.
Maybe another year of let's get him some talent in Minnesota to work with now, to where he's maximizing everything, where there's like drips that he's got to try to turn into cups of water. Like, okay, give him a year now where maybe you give him some more talent, and that talent from last year goes a little bit further, and now maybe he can really show what he can do once you give him some stuff. But his star is still, I think, a guy that's on the rise, and eventually does strike me as a guy eventually will be a head coach in this league at some point or another.
Alex Van Pelt got fired from the Browns, which surprised me, but he was a guy I was kind of taking a peek at a little bit as a Stefanski tree individual. So I don't know about that one now. Maybe there was a reason why he got fired. Maybe they just fired him because they were like, you're free now, run free, go get your job wherever you want to. I don't know what to make of that one, but I kind of was interested in Van Pelt.
Van Pelt had a bad massage experience, and that's really at the heart of that, I've heard. So it's something there, back a connection to Deshaun. I don't know. I mean, it's that's what the rumor mill says. No, that is an odd one, Brendan. How do you hold the offensive coordinator responsible there when you got to have to peel Joe Flacco off a couch at 46 years old and try to get the best out of him? I mean,
how many teams in NFL history have won a game with 4 different quarterbacks in 1 year?
Right. I don't know. And maybe it's just that Stefanski there feels like I'm the guy that is making this happen offensively. You're just here riding my coattails. So it doesn't matter who's riding the coattails. I'm the driver here. I'm the captain now. So maybe it's just a bit of that. But yeah, that's an odd one though, to let him go. Very strange move.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. Yeah, you did Brian Callahan already, which by the way, I think we already discussed this, but the Callahan idea becomes more interesting if he's bringing his dad to be offensive coordinator or offensive line coach.
It does. I think at the very little, you're getting some benefit from the dad coming into play, kind of like Kyle Shanahan still gets the benefit from Mike Shanahan being, here, there, and around. You know what I mean? Like, there's no doubt his dad's giving him help and tidbits through the weeks and helping him out. So you are getting at least that, I think. But maybe a position coach on top of it, and a hell of an offensive line coach back in the day, Mr. Callahan.
I'd argue he's still considered to be the premier offensive line coach in the NFL. Like he did great work in Cleveland, did great work in Dallas, did work in Washington, a couple other places as well. That's his thing.
Yeah, it's a fair point. That's a guy that's one of those guys that you talked about should be a coordinator, should be a line coach. Callahan got all the way up to head coach, probably always should have remained in that offensive line coach lane. That was the best spot for him. But Sun's on the rise, man. His son's making it happen. Guard Knight, thank you for the $5 donation. It says Brendan's video from a couple days back had me convinced Waldron should stay at the very least compared to some of these offensive coordinators up for head coaching gigs.
Yeah, I made a video about this the other day, and I've mentioned this a few times in videos since then, kind of asking like, okay, what makes these guys so much better than Waldron? What makes Bobby Slowick better than Waldron? Like Houston this year, 13th in points, 15th in EPA, so slightly above average. Like Waldron's done better than that, but Waldron had a better offense than that last year. He had a slightly worse offense this year with a bottom 3 offensive line. Like Waldron has 3 years of coordinator experience. Slowick has 1. Ben Johnson has 2. The Canales has 1. And Canales, by the way, yeah, it was impressive because of what he had to work with, but that was a mediocre offense. They were 20th in the league. They didn't even score 21 points a game. So I did ask, like, wait a minute, guys, what are we sure that Waldron shouldn't be in the same conversation with a guy like Canales or Slowick?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point there, especially bringing into, let's add a little bit on top of this, that I think with Waldron, there's a fair point to be said here that the offense has not been allowed to run fully and free in its time here, that there's been at least some minor hindrance to it, especially when it comes to utilizing the outside running game aspect of things, and then also throwing, of course, to the middle of the field and intermediate routes in general. So, if I was to hear that in the background, that wouldn't surprise me at least about Waldron, and then to understand that he's accomplished those marks that you talk about, albeit he's had a talented crew overall in a lot of other places, that's still very impressive. And I would be open to it as well. I wouldn't be opposed to keeping in that realm with it and saying, this is actually, a guy that is really a good coordinator and consider what he's had to do against what he went up against. So I think it's a fair point. Totally fair point. There's a little bit of that unknown there, right, Brendan, where it's like, yeah, but what was the real, it's like the dynamic between Schneider and Carroll, who made this call, who made that call? When was one guy overridden? Were you allowed to just put your offensive attack together every week, wholesale, without Carroll coming in and being like, take that out, take this out, take this out. You get to run that once, you get to run that once. And so I feel a little bit like how it is, especially the fly sweeps, like you get one fly sweep a game. That's all you get. No more.
Yeah. At the very least, if we hire a defensive head coach, I would really like to look at trying to get Waldron back, because then you could maintain continuity.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. You could. And especially if you look at maybe some of the potential hires, those some of these guys, we don't know who they're going to look for their OC. And if it's one that's like a big question mark, especially, a lot more happier to go to the more safe waters in what we know on this one a bit, because I know that he can get this team offensively in the good spot. Defensively are really where our big questions are at right now. Garth, I want to thank you for all your donations tonight, including another $5 donation here. You are very, very kind, brother. I appreciate you so very much. We do, I should say on that one. I know Brennan does as well. Kafka seems like a Hashka type. He's a big computer brain attached to a human body. He's basically a Vulcan.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's really hard to separate Kafka from the Andy Reid stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm open to it. I remember a lot of people 3 years ago when we hired Waldron really wanted Kafka as the OC.
I do remember that as well. So he has been a guy that has been talked about quite a bit, and just a tough evaluation when you don't have the parts to work with, and then you have middling results, and then you go, well, it is why I like Ben Johnson a little bit, Brendan, because when he did come in there, they did have just Amon St. Brown and a lot of number 3 kind of wide receivers, and the line wasn't quite in the place that it's at right now where it's really humming. And he turned that thing around so hugely in the one season, even with that kind of secondhand parts versus a guy like Kafka, got the middling results with the lesser talent. But he's a guy that they're going to talk to, Brendan. Maybe he comes in there and blows Schneider away with that big brain, Garth. And he's able to, win him over. They're interviewing him for a reason on this one, and it ain't the Rooney Rule. You know what I mean? So we'll see what they do with him. But he's an interesting guy. And the Reed tree, man, those guys get hired, success or not. They do get hired, unless your name's Eric Bieniemy, in which case you are cast out of the village and never allowed back in.
Right.
Appreciate you so much, Garth. Thank you. Zen Lunatic. Thank you for the $10 donation. I appreciate you, Zen, for that. You guys are very kind and I'm always on the donations. Thank you so much. Do you think the coach we hire will affect our draft, or are we BPA no matter if offensive or a defensive guy? Good question.
Has to change it somewhat. Remember, BPA is subjective, guys. Remember, BPA, everyone's going to have their own opinion on what BPA is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. And the value, and what is BPA is the value of the board. The value of your board is going to be interconnected, Zen, back to the scheme that you're running. So it's not instructed separately from the scheme or your philosophy. So if you need, let's think of a position for this that would make, maybe some sense on this where, if I've got a guy who's going to run a 3-4 defense and he just wants space eaters up front to clog it up, well, then I'm not going to go look for a 3-tech 4-3 who may be the most talented, valuable guy on my board, but I go put that most valuable guy 3-tech into that defense who belongs on a 4-3 defense. That's not going to be smart. That's not going to be the proper way to construct it. So it's absolutely is informed. It's probably going to make it hard for us to do our mock. We're going to do our mock draft anyway, I think here in a week, Brendan, but it might make it hard if we don't have our head coach quite yet to get an exact. That's why you have multiple mocks though, right, Brendan? You have your initial mock to get your just kind of out there, and then you push it along and you refine it from there as you get more information.
Yeah.
But no, you would always want it to be instructed by what you're running from a scheme standpoint. That's going to lead a little bit, but then there's still you leaning to your value on that. So if it is that 3-4 defense and, you've got your space eater 3-4 defensive end, or you've got your, outside corner, that's a shutdown corner, what's going to be of, who's the better guy, who gives you the bigger, the better upside. They're both scheme fits at that point, but who's just the purely best guy, regardless of where your current basically depth's at, just who is the best, what's the best value at that point. And that's the key to our great drafts in recent years, is that we've stayed in that value concept, and you can still do that with any coach. It's just that kind of commitment that you got to stay in on.
Right. I agree.
Appreciate you, Zen Lunatic, and a great question on that one. Garth Knight, thank you for the $5 donation. Thank you so much, brother. It says, Callahan's dad is part of that Raiders Super Bowl in 2003. I think that a lot of Raider fans, players, have conspiracy theories about that. Yeah, that was the one that had the Pro Bowl center for the Raiders. The night before the game, something happened. I don't know, still don't understand exactly what, like he freaked out or lost his mind or something. But there were some weird circumstances around that Raiders team.
Yeah, that was the one where Gruden went from Oakland to Tampa Bay in the trade, and Oakland didn't change their calls offensively when Gruden left.
Oh,
So in the Super Bowl, Tampa Bay knew all their calls. So I think they threw like 3 pick sixes in that game or something.
that's right.
Eh,
I do remember
Pretty
that.
bad
Yeah.
oversight, a pretty glaring oversight.
It reminds me of the Russ deal coming in from Denver in that first year, and he was using all the same hand signals that he had in Seattle. Lockett picked up on it and started telling the defense in that game against Denver. Remember that on the
Yeah.
sidelines that he was picking that up. So that's pretty funny. That you gotta change your calls, man. Got to change your calls. But I guess that does make sense. The Robbins thing, and then them knowing the calls, that would get some people with the conspiracy theories out, going,
Yeah. Do
hmm.
you remember the Niners Packers playoff game where T.O. caught the game winner, the catch 2.0?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I watched a documentary on that game once, and I remember Favre telling the story of one of what he thought at the time was going to be the game-winning touchdown pass came on a play where because the Niners and Packers at that time both ran the same offense, he ran like this dummy audible where he like pulled out from under center and like stuck his hand out behind him. And he was like, okay, the Niners are going to see this and think we're audibly into this, but this is just a dummy signal that I'm going to use to throw them off because I know that they know our offense, and it worked. So, stuff like that. You're like, I know that you guys know our offense, so I'm going to do a bunch of new stuff to throw you guys off. And I remember watching that and thinking, that's really cool.
That's smart. That's smart. I know, I know, kind of thing, right? You stay ahead on that point of it. So that is very smart on that. But you got to change your line calls, man. Got to change can't hold on to stuff for years on end, man. You'll get it exploited. So that was a good Raiders team. They ran up against a buzzsaw, though, in that Tampa Bay team. I think that's one of the truly great defenses that have been assembled over the last 50 years in football. That Tampa Bay unit with Sapp and Derek Brooks and Simeon Rice, Rondé Barber. Who's the safety? 49ers general manager.
John Lynch.
John Lynch. So hell of a unit there. Hell of a unit they put together.
Very special.
Thank you, Garth, so much, man. I appreciate you, brother. Taker610 with another $2 donation. Thanks for the double donation tonight, Taker610. Antonio Pierce and Jared Mayo as head coaches. What's next? Bobby Wagner?
I'm really surprised New England it seemed like they didn't do anything outside of their own building.
No, they did the thing that teams have been doing recently, Brendan, which is just they have this is the guy it's going to be. And you're like, did you guys really go through a process there? Or did you really sift through this one? Like, yeah.
Bob Kraft trying to save that money for, well, I'm not going to get into that, but he's trying to save money for something.
Yeah. Let's bring back the masseuses full circle here. The masseuse references.
He's saving that money for something, but that's a hell of a step back.
Yeah, it really is, especially when you might have had a guy you would have thought in a guy like Vrabel that would have made so much sense coming in there, and a guy that played there, and maybe it didn't. Maybe just that wasn't that connection we were all making was not as much a keen one. But yeah, they just kind of went, okay, we're going to this guy, and Jared's been kind of connected there softly for a while. If Belichick was going to leave, so this was something that's been understood as to happen. And Pierce just did a magical job with that Raiders team. He got that team to play hard for him. And I mean, they were a different bunch when he took over from which probably isn't hard to do, right? If you've got Mike McDaniels running your show and you're taking over as the next head coach, you're going to look pretty nice, right?
Oh, Josh McDaniels.
Sorry, Josh McDaniels. There's too many Macs in the coaching world in the NFL, Brandon. I'm getting them all confused, but yeah, there are. Pierce done a good job. I will say, Taker, it's no coincidence that you have middle linebackers ending up as head coaches. There's actually, I think, been quite a few middle linebackers through the ages that have ended up as head coaches. It's, I think, a little bit natural. In fact, I think D'Amico Ryans, I think, is a former middle linebacker.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken. So I think there's a couple of them in the sport right now that were former guys in that spot. They're the captains on defense. They're the signal play callers. They're the guys making the line adjustments when the quarterback does that thing that Brendan was just talking about Brett Favre doing with the pistol move thing. He's the guy over there going, oh, right? So there's a lot on the middle linebacker shoulders. We saw that in B-Wags this year and what he had to try to carry on his shoulders. Usually like Atlas this year with that defense trying to get everybody in the right place in the right time in the right spot. But it's a natural progression, much I think like quarterbacks going and becoming head coaches as well. It's a bit of just an outstretching of what you're already kind of doing on the field anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you though, Taker. Appreciate you for that. You buying into my talk on that? You buying head coaches as being kind of maybe the second most position that you would find in the NFL as a head coach?
Seems like it. I mean, Vrabel was another example, right? He was an inside linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
Singletary, although he flamed out, I mean, he did something right, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, he got at least
Uh,
earn the job.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's I never really thought about it like that, but now that I think about it, feels like a lot of the great coaches either didn't play or barely played. Like John Madden never played a down of NFL football. I remember reading about that.
Yeah, it's true. You can be it's one of those things, like you can be a great coach, not necessarily happen to play. And especially now it seems like it's going more and more in that trend where a lot of coaches have just been coaches since their 20s now. And that's when they got in and they're in it and they're going and they're rolling along. One more dono here from Garth. Thank you, Garth, so much for another donation. $5 drop. It says, didn't Belichick have Mayo tapped as his successor in his contract? If true, that is cool. And I hope the best for Mayo. Was that the truth? I hadn't heard that was in a Belichick's contract.
I mean, if so, that's kind of silly, isn't it? That's like, why would Belichick care that much about something like that? I don't know. I don't know if I buy that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like if it's in the contract, it's more about doing right by Mayo than it is making sure the team's doing right. Because if you're any person moving on as the head coach, you go, look, the process now is to undertake the process the Hawks have, where you exhaustively go out there and look for all of the possible great candidates that exist. And if you're just tapping one guy to be the successor, then you're not doing that. And we've learned here in Seattle the dangers of just looking always in-house for your coaching hires. And that's really not the best trek to take when you have all the possibilities out across the nation to go out there and take a look at. It's cool, Garth. I give you, it is totally cool for Belichick to do for Mayo. And it shows you he did him a solid on that one. And hopefully Mayo can take advantage of that. He's a guy with a great reputation too, going back to his playing days. He was known as a guy that was basically a coach on the field when he played.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was a New England fan, I'd be like,
you didn't at least want to interview with Vrabel?
Yeah, he's not even a interview. Like not even just a call like, how would you like to go and take over for? No, not even no. It's Mayo. Okay.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't understand it either on that one. But cool for him to do it for Mayo. Definitely a guy that's doing right by his coach. If he put that in, that's a hell of a contractual. Like you said, I've never heard of that before in my life, Garth, of a coach doing that before. Thank you, though, brother. Appreciate you. Ryan Wilson, thank you for the $5 donation. Says, would you be able to live with Mike Vrabel as head coach and Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator? If we could add a decent offensive coordinator. Well, I think your decent offense coordinator would probably be Arthur Smith. So you'd have Arthur Smith as your OC, I think, Ryan. You'd have Martindale as your DC and Vrabel as your head coach. You signing up for that, Brendan?
Yeah, I would be okay with that. I could get up for that one for sure.
Yeah, I could sign up for it as well here, Ryan, because I do think you're getting Arthur Smith. Martindale was a guy that I've liked a lot from afar for quite a bit of time. I don't think anybody would have taken that New York defense and turned them into a prime crew with where they are from a talent standpoint. The defensive tackles were good up front with Leonard Williams and Lawrence, but Thibodeau's been kind of he's what are you going to do with that guy, right? And he's a duck. I'm kidding, but it's with Martindale, you've got a guy in Vrabel who will keep him under control. He's not going to let him just send the blitz house all the time. Vrabel's going to have a very eager hand in that room, defensively speaking. So I like him keeping Martindale just under enough control in that respect. But that'd be a hell of a staff. That would be a hell of a staff, Ryan. I certainly would not be shaking a finger at that, man. You can do a lot worse than that crew.
Absolutely. Sign me up for that. If that's our coaching staff going into 2024, I'm feeling like this is going to be a pretty good year. I do too. And keeping in mind with Martindale is that this is a guy, if you like Mike McDonald, then Martindale's a guy that you should have some, at least, you can like McDonald more, but at least be satisfied. If you can't get McDonald to get into Martindale, because you're getting a bit of an offshoot of that. If you do have a bit of a preference for that one guy than the other, in the way that that does look. But thank you, Garth, Taker 610, Zen Lunatic.
and Garth Knight for all of your donations. Coded Dad, you too, and Don Mata, you becoming a new member of the channel. You guys are very kind tonight on all of your donations as ever here. Please do, if you guys could for me, hit that like button here. Get, of course, subbed up if you're not already to the Seahawks, Brendan Nelson, and the Hawks Nest, as we will be doing these shows here throughout this off season. We've got a load of shows lined up here, including next week. We're going to be taking a look and doing our first mock draft next week, Brendan. Yes?
Yeah, I think that is the plan. I mean, if we hire somebody in the next week, which I doubt, I imagine we'll talk about that a little bit. But for now, that is the plan.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, one last question. I'm going to put Brendan your feet to the fire. Okay. I'm going to do it like the old school robbers did it, where they take the little match and they put it at the end of the toes. Who is going to be the Seahawks' next coach? Your life's on the line. Your answer is determined by this. Okay. Gun to your head. Give me the, I'll just, whether you like it or don't like it, what do you just feel like in this situation is going to happen?
Canales.
Wow.
I'll say Canales because of his Seattle roots, basically growing up in that coaching tree for over a decade, having this good year in Tampa. I feel like it's either him or Vrabel. I'm going to go with that. I feel like it's either him or Mike Vrabel.
I'll take the Vrabel side of it because I think both Vrabel's getting his share of heat, and that's I think as good enough as any that he's the guy. But that'd be surprising. But to your point, Schneider did say we want to carry on the culture, and we've all been thinking, well, Quinn will carry on the culture. But there's a guy that does directly understand how to carry through the culture, how to keep it going, and understands what he's getting into in the building when he walks in. So he would check all those boxes as well, Brendan, to your point of it. But I like that. That's bold. You're going for your number 5 as the option they take. That's nice. I like that. I like that. That's strong, brother. That's really strong. Hey, it's good to see Mark Sanchez in the house. Mark, been a bit of time seeing you on the channel. Hope you're doing well out there. Thank you for the $5 donation. He says, what's the deal with Eric Bieniemy? Why don't any teams give him a shot?
Hey, he's got the scarlet letter, man.
There is some scarlet letter here, Mark. And as to what it is, I can give you some thoughts on it. There's something that went down at Colorado, supposedly, that's sort of this worry. He did some coaching thing at Colorado that there's scandal went down there that a lot of people think is going to get dredged back up if he becomes a head coach and becomes more of a story where it's been kind of pushed away at this point. But I don't really have, and Brendan and me both have turned this over a few times, Mark, and kind of being unsure of why this is the case with him. When you look at the Andy Reid guys underneath of him, I mean, Jesus, Mike Kafka even, everyone gets a job. And like Brendan said, not all of them are successful, but they do get a job. And this guy was the offensive coordinator under the best offensive seasons of the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's just go behind that, right? Best offensive seasons, Brendan, of both the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, Andy Reid, right? Both stints. No offense better than the time of what he was running as the OC for them. So it doesn't add up at all that he hasn't been given even an interview request from anybody, much less being given a job here. And the past year, nobody was going to make anything happen with that Washington team. Everybody knew Rivera was basically a lame duck with the new ownership coming in there and taking over, that they were going to have to basically get to the playoffs and have tremendous success to have any shot. And then he's got a 5th round pick in Howell with an offensive line that's okay. And then past Terry McLaurin, not much else. He did all right with it. He did serviceable work with what there was to work with, but he does seem to be a guy that just can't seem to get any love when it comes to the NFL. And I wish I had a better reason. Usually I would have a better reason, Mark. Maybe Brendan, you've got something you're aware of, but I just have never heard anything as far as a legitimate reason as to why he has been given this scarlet letter, why it's been tattooed into his chest.
Yeah. And it's every team. All he needs is one team and he would have a head coaching job. Yeah. So that tells me there's something legitimate, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Something there's in the background that's is unreported about, I guess, with it. Because otherwise, we've really not seen a candidate like this go through the years. I can't think of one, Brendan, that should have been eligible, should be getting some job interviews, should be eventually getting hired, who's just completely glossed over. It does. I don't get it. I really don't. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that donation, and it's a great question. We'll see where Bieniemy lands this offseason. Maybe he finally lands at a place where he can be an offensive coordinator with some actual talent and then take that. I mean, maybe Ben Johnson gets hired and he goes to Detroit or something,
Right.
and along those lines, and where he can then really show it off and then get that chance at some point. So
Mhm.
we'll see with that. I appreciate you guys watching tonight. I thank you guys, everyone, for the donations in the chat. You guys are very kind as ever on that. We will be back here next Thursday, unless we've got some breaking news about the head coaching hire. We're going to be taking a look at the draft. We're going to be doing our first live mock draft here this offseason, one of many that we'll be doing on this channel this offseason. So tune back in that next Thursday for that on that side of it. We'll keep our ear here to the ground as far as if there is any rumors or anything that does jump up that is breaking news between me and Brendan here throughout this offseason. You guys can count on that. Any final thoughts, Brendan, on this coaching search? Or you think we covered it all here?
Yeah, I think we got it pretty good. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it, man. The last couple of days, especially, they've given us reason to believe that something intriguing is going to happen here. It's not going to be boring.
They really have. They've given us so many good indications about them doing this properly, Brendan, and them taking just the right, exhaustive, perfect little steps along every route of this to make sure that they're doing everything they possibly can to bring in the right candidate. And that should then bear out the right candidate. So if you're not trying to do the Jared Mayo, he's got the job thing, but actually here we go. We're going to embrace this process, or like John Schneider said, let it also educate us a little bit about where we're at and where we need to go as far as continually thinking forward here in this NFL and how it evolves. Then they're doing those steps, and they're interviewing some very bright minds in this sport here, and some guys that definitely have a lot of potential to take this program forward. So an exciting time to be a Seahawks fan. I've heard from many people, Brendan, I'm sure you have as well in your chat, about a rejuvenation a little bit in some of the minds and thoughts about where this team potentially is going in the future. A little bit less of a certainty about, I know what we're going to get on NFL Sundays, and more of there being a question mark, both for the good and the bad, but there being a level of an excitement kind of attached with that here as we go into the future, which is kind of cool to see. I do feel it a little bit myself as well. Well, thank you guys for watching. We'll be back in a week. Until that time, as we're in the midst of this coaching search, keep it at the forefront of your mind. Do not ever forget, especially right now as we're about to hire the next Seahawks coach who's about ready to hopefully take us back to the promised land. Please, never you forget, especially in the offseason. There is no offseason here in Seattle. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.